my style there of the T-shirt, no socks, no belt, was a function of how fucking hot it was in Miami. I mean, it wasn't really sort of thought out. It was just organic.
He was the coolest man on television. Pastel suits, no socks, a Ferrari, and a smirk that made half the world lose their minds. Don Johnson else, and for a few glorious years in the 80s, that meant he basically was Hollywood. But then the headlines started whispering something darker. Bankruptcy, debt, a courtroom battle worth millions. So what actually happened to Don Johnson? And how much of the lost everything story is even true? The man who invented cool. Before we get into the money drama, we need to understand just how high Don Johnson climbed, because the fall only makes sense when you know the height. Donald Wayne Johnson was born on December 15, 1949, in Flat Creek, Missouri. He grew up in a working-class family and showed an early knack for performance, eventually studying drama at the University of Kansas before transferring to the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco. This wasn't some overnight discovery. Johnson put in years of small roles, B-movies, and near misses before the industry noticed him. And then came 1984. Miami Vice debuted on NBC, and practically overnight, Don Johnson became a cultural phenomenon. The show was unlike anything television had ever seen. Cinematic, stylish, drenched in neon and synthesizer music. Johnson's detective Sonny Crockett was magnetic, brooding, dangerous, impossibly well-dressed. He wore Armani the way other men wore jeans. He made the stubble look intentional. He made everything look intentional. The ratings were enormous. The cultural impact was even bigger. Miami Vice didn't just top the charts. It changed fashion, music, and the entire visual language of American television. Don Johnson was nominated for Golden Globes. He won a People's Choice Award. He was on the cover of everything. It is genuinely difficult to explain to anyone who didn't live through it just how famous Don Johnson became in the mid-80s. This wasn't simply a popular television actor getting his moment. For a sustained period of time, he was one of the most recognizable human beings on the planet. Magazine covers, talk shows, award ceremonies, advertisers lined up, networks called, and audiences, enormous, devoted, borderline obsessed audiences, could not get enough of him. NBC had actually been uncertain about the show before it aired. The pilot almost didn't happen. But once it did, the numbers were staggering. The show regularly pulled in 40 million viewers at its peak, which by modern standards is almost incomprehensible. And the fashion ripple effect was immediate and total. Overnight, men's clothing stores reported a run on linen blazers, sockless loafers, and pastel shirts. Men who had never thought twice about what they wore were suddenly asking for the Sonny Crockett look. Don Johnson didn't just wear the clothes. He became the reason people wanted to wear them. The music industry noticed too. Miami Vice was one of the first television shows to treat its soundtrack as a genuine commercial product, placing contemporary pop and new wave music throughout episodes in a way that drove actual record sales. Phil Collins, Glenn Frey, Jan Hammer's synthesizer score became a hit on its own. The show was practically a music video delivery system with a crime plot attached. Johnson himself leveraged the moment into a recording career. His single Heartbeat charted in the United Kingdom in 1986, reaching the top 5, which remains one of the more unexpected footnotes in pop history given that he was, first and foremost, an actor. A second album followed. He was performing in arenas. He was everywhere at once, and he seemed to be loving every second of it. And the money followed accordingly. By the later seasons of Miami Vice, Johnson had become one of the highest-paid actors in television, earning a reported $150,000 per episode. That is serious money by any era's standards. But here's what the gossip channels don't always tell you. The same ambition that made Johnson a star also made him a risk-taker. And risk-takers, especially in Hollywood, don't always win every bet. So if Miami Vice made him a fortune, how did a bankruptcy filing end up attached to his name? The money, the debt, and the ranch. Let's talk about what actually happened. Because the Don Johnson lost everything headline that floats around YouTube is, at best, a dramatic simplification, and at worst, outright misleading. After Miami Vice ended in 1989, Johnson stayed busy, but not without friction. The post-Vice years illustrated a problem that many iconic television actors run into. When you have played a character so thoroughly, so completely, that the character and the actor become fused in the public imagination, what exactly do you do next? He tried films. Dead Bang in 1989. The Hot Spot in 1990. Harley Davidson and the Marlboro Man in 1991, which has since developed a cult following. Though it was not a critical hit at the time, Tin Cup in 1996 opposite Kevin Costner showed he could hold his own in studio comedies. But Hollywood never quite found the right vehicle to translate what Johnson had been on television into consistent box office success. He was too big a personality for supporting roles and too associated with one specific character to easily headline something new. It is a trap that has caught many television stars of his generation. The medium made them enormous. The same medium made it hard to escape. Sonny Crockett followed Don Johnson everywhere he went, whether he wanted him to or not. And then eventually came another television hit, Nash Bridges, which ran on CBS from 1996 to 2001. On the surface, it looked like a second act most actors would kill for. A reliable procedural, a loyal audience, another iconic character, this time San Francisco homicide inspector Nash Bridges, complete with a yellow Plymouth Barracuda that became as much of a character as Johnson himself. But behind the scenes, Johnson's financial life was getting complicated. The most concrete and verified event in the Don Johnson money story is this. In 2004, Johnson filed for bankruptcy protection. The specific trigger was a Colorado ranch that was facing auction. He used the bankruptcy filing to halt that sale. This is the real event. Documented, reported, factual. Now, let's be clear about what that means and what it doesn't mean. Filing for bankruptcy protection is not the same as being broke, destitute, or losing everything. It is a legal mechanism, one that wealthy people and corporations use regularly to reorganize debt, protect assets, and buy time. Donald Trump has done it. Major airlines have done it. Retailers, restaurant chains, and real estate developers use it constantly. The word bankruptcy in a headline implies catastrophe. The legal reality is often far more strategic. Once the word bankruptcy appears next to a celebrity's name, most readers stop processing details. They imagine empty bank accounts and moving trucks. They picture someone who had everything and now has nothing. The reality, particularly for high earners with complex financial lives, is almost always more complicated than that. Johnson had accumulated real debt and real financial trouble. Court filings and media coverage from the period confirm he was dealing with serious money problems tied to business and property issues. The ranch situation was real. The debt was real. But the narrative that he went from penthouses to poverty? That requires a lot more editorial invention than actual fact. And here's the part that the clickbait universe almost always leaves out. Because if Don Johnson was truly ruined, What on earth was he doing in a courtroom fighting for $23 million? The Nash Bridges case. This is where the story gets genuinely interesting and genuinely complicated, and where you need to understand a little bit about how Hollywood actually works, because it explains everything. The concept is called profit participation. When a studio or production company makes a deal with a talent, an actor, a director, a writer, they sometimes offer a percentage of the profits as part of the compensation package. Sounds reasonable, right? Except Hollywood has a long and well-documented history of declaring projects unprofitable, even when those same projects have generated enormous revenue. The accounting methods used are notoriously creative. Expenses get loaded onto a project. Overhead gets charged. Marketing costs get allocated. By the time the studio's accountants are finished, a show that ran for 6 seasons and sold into syndication can somehow, on paper, look like a money-losing enterprise. This practice is so widespread and so notorious that it even has an unofficial nickname in the industry: Hollywood accounting. And it has been the subject of lawsuits, exposés, and industry outrage for decades. Winston Groom, who wrote the novel Forrest Gump, famously claimed he never received his profit participation payment despite the film grossing over $600 million at the worldwide box office. Similar disputes have been filed by everyone from Art Buchwald to the heirs of the author of Coming to America. Don Johnson, it turned out, had his own version of this fight. While he was navigating personal financial difficulties, he was simultaneously embroiled in a major legal dispute over Nash Bridges. He had claimed ownership rights and alleged he was owed unpaid profits tied to the series. The producers, for their part, argued the show had actually lost money, deploying exactly the kind of creative accounting the industry had become infamous for. A jury was not impressed. They awarded Don Johnson $23.2 million in profits he said he was owed. The BBC reported on the case, and it stands as one of the more significant profit participation verdicts in television history. A reminder that juries, unlike studio accountants, tend to apply something closer to common sense. Let that number sink in for a moment. $23.2 million, awarded by a jury, to a man who, according to the YouTube thumbnail universe, had supposedly lost absolutely everything. This is why the Don Johnson rags to riches narrative is so frustratingly sloppy. What actually happened is far more nuanced. A man who made significant money, took on significant debt, filed for legal protection over a specific asset, and simultaneously fought and won a major court battle over profits he believed he was owed. That's not a rise and fall story. That's a complicated, messy, very human financial life. The clickbait version takes bankruptcy protection from 2004 and later won millions in court and weaves them into a neat, dramatic arc of total ruin, followed by miraculous comeback. The reality is messier, less cinematic, and far more interesting. But money troubles aside, what did any of this do to Don Johnson the person? Because the man himself kept showing up, kept working, kept being Don Johnson. The personal life that kept everyone talking. You cannot tell the Don Johnson story without acknowledging that his personal life has always generated at least as many headlines as his professional one. His most famous relationship, the one that the tabloids have never entirely let go of, is his on-again, off-again, married-twice dynamic with Melanie Griffith. The two first got together when Griffith was a teenager and Johnson was in his mid-20s. They married briefly in 1976, when Griffith was 18, divorced, and then famously remarried in 1989, at the height of Johnson's fame. They had a daughter together, Dakota Johnson, who has since become a major star in her own right. They ultimately divorced for the second time in 1996. For years, Don Johnson and Melanie Griffith were one of Hollywood's most talked-about couples. Their relationship seemed to operate on its own set of rules. They would separate, reunite, and somehow keep finding their way back to one another. The public was fascinated because they represented two things Hollywood loves more than anything: glamour and unpredictability. Every time they appeared together, there was speculation that they might make it work permanently. Every time they split, there was another round of headlines wondering what went wrong. What makes the story unusual is that their relationship eventually evolved into something relatively rare in celebrity circles: a functional friendship. Over the years, both have spoken positively about one another despite their complicated history. There were no years-long public feuds, no endless tabloid wars, and no tell-all books dedicated to settling scores. Instead, they gradually transitioned into co-parents focused on their daughter Dakota. And then came the unexpected twist. Dakota Johnson grew up to become a major Hollywood star herself. In some ways, she has become as recognizable to younger audiences as either of her parents were to their own generation. It created a fascinating situation where Don Johnson went from being the famous parent to occasionally being introduced as Dakota Johnson's father. Fortunately, he seems to find the whole thing amusing, rather than threatening. By all accounts, he has embraced her success and taken obvious pride in what she has accomplished. Johnson has been married a total of 5 times. His wives include Melanie Griffith, twice, actress Patty D'Arbanville, with whom he has a son, Jesse, and Kelly Flager, a San Francisco socialite, whom he married in 1999 and remains married to today. Together, they have 3 children. The picture that emerges from Johnson's personal life is one of a man who loves intensely, commits repeatedly, and has built, across a complicated romantic history, a genuinely large and apparently close-knit family. His daughter Dakota has spoken warmly about him in interviews. His children from various relationships appear to have maintained real relationships with their father. He has also been open, over the years, about periods of substance use earlier in his life, something he has addressed publicly rather than hidden. It is part of his history, and he has owned it. So, if Don Johnson survived financial turbulence, a complicated personal life, and decades of Hollywood pressure, what does the man look like at 76? Don Johnson at 76. Here is what is genuinely remarkable about Don Johnson in the present tense. He is still working, still showing up, still, by all appearances, enjoying the ride. And the roles he has chosen in his later career suggest a man who is deliberately avoiding the nostalgia circuit. He appeared in Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained in 2012, a small but memorable role in a film that dominated the cultural conversation. He played the police captain in the HBO limited series Watchmen in 2019, the acclaimed adaptation that was one of the most discussed television events of that year. He appeared in Book Club opposite Diane Keaton and Jane Fonda. He had a recurring role in Eastbound and Down. Each of these choices is different. None of them is coasting on the Miami Vice legacy. All of them suggest an actor who is still interested in what he's doing. His most prominent recent chapter has been the Knives Out franchise. Johnson appeared in the 2019 original, the Rian Johnson-directed murder mystery that became a genuine cultural moment, alongside an ensemble that included Daniel Craig, Chris Evans, Jamie Lee Curtis, and Toni Collette. The film was a critical and commercial hit, and Johnson's presence in it was a reminder that he still carries real screen weight. He wasn't there as a nostalgia act. He was there because he was good. Physically, Johnson at 76 is recognizably the same person who starred in Miami Vice. The jaw is still there. The confidence is still there. He has aged in the way that people who take care of themselves age, visibly but well. He and Kelly Flegger have been married for over 25 years, which in Hollywood terms is essentially a geological epoch. They split their time between residences and by most accounts maintain a relatively private life, given how relentlessly public Johnson's earlier decades were. His children, Dakota from Melanie Griffith, Jesse from Patty Darbanville, and the three youngest with Kelly, represent a sprawling but apparently functional family unit. Dakota Johnson's own stardom has brought a new generation of fans to the Johnson name, and the two have spoken warmly about their relationship publicly. But let's come back to the question that started all of this. Did Don Johnson really lose everything? Setting the record straight, the honest answer is no, not in any meaningful sense of the phrase. What Don Johnson experienced was a period of serious financial difficulty. Real debt, real legal trouble, a real bankruptcy filing in 2004 over a specific asset. These are documented facts, and they are not nothing. Financial trouble at that scale is genuinely stressful, regardless of how famous you are or how much you have earned. But serious financial difficulty is a very different thing from lost everything. The latter implies destitution, ruin, a complete collapse from which recovery is miraculous. The former is something that happens to a significant number of high earners, in Hollywood and beyond, who make large money, spend large money, take on real estate and business risk, and find themselves in complicated territory. The Nash Bridges verdict alone, $23.2 million awarded by a jury, tells you that Johnson's story is not a cautionary tale about a man who threw it all away. It is the story of a man who earned significantly, ran into serious trouble, fought legally for what he believed he was owed, and continued working. The YouTube thumbnail version of this story, the one that promises ruin, poverty, dramatic transformation, is built on a kernel of truth that has been inflated well beyond what the actual reporting supports. The bankruptcy protection filing was real. The debt was real. The rest is creative embellishment. Don Johnson at 76 is not a ghost story or a cautionary tale. He is a man who climbed to extraordinary heights, navigated real turbulence, financial and personal, and came out the other side still working, still present, still that specific kind of magnetic that very few people in the world actually possess. That is a harder thing to do than it looks. Hollywood is full of people who burned bright and then disappeared. Actors who couldn't survive the transition from one era to the next, who got swallowed by the machinery, who let the money or the fame or the pressure undo them completely. Johnson bent. He did not break. And at an age when most of his generation has either retired or faded from view, he is still on screen, still taking interesting work, still showing up. The gossip is always going to be more dramatic than the truth. That's the nature of the machine. But the truth here is interesting enough on its own. A complicated man, a complicated life, real money problems that real lawyers sorted out in real courtrooms, and a career that has now spanned more than 5 decades. He started with nothing in Missouri and built something genuinely significant. Whatever the tabloids say, that part is not up for debate. If you want more deep dives into the real stories behind the headlines, not the thumbnail version, but what actually happened, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We do this every week.